Hello everyone, I'm Asha Nayaswami. This is my friend Keshava Betts, and we are class number 2 of this wonderful book, In Divine Friendship, Letters of Counsel and Reflection by Swami Kriyananda. So we'll start with a prayer, then Keshava will lead us in a couple of chants, brief meditation, then we'll begin. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest Swamiji, bless us that we may feel your consciousness, that in reading your words we are given your bliss and your wisdom. We are your children. Lead us home to thee. Om. Peace. Amen.
divine mother, engrossed is the bee of my mind, on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine mother, 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 my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind, on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind, on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine mother, 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 my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind, on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind, on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine mother, 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 my divine mother.
We'll meditate now for just a couple of minutes. All right. Om. Peace. Amen. I forget where I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. Just meditating nicely away, and then crosses my mind that I'm sitting in this chair. And usually what happens in this chair is not that I just sit there and meditate for as long as I want to. So I pieced it back together. I did a little reverse engineering. If I'm in this chair, probably something else is supposed to happen. So here we are in divine friendship with Swami Kriyananda. I was saying earlier that, earlier when I introduced this class last week, this book is divided into quite a few categories. There's quite a few of them. So we're working now with love, which is the first category of the book. Okay, so this letter was on December 5th, 1990. Let me think, December 5th, 1990. The SRF lawsuit was filed against us in July of 1990. And the controversy that led to the filing of that lawsuit began at the end of January of 1990, or the beginning of January. So this is 1 year into this litigation where Swamiji's Guru Bhais are suing him in order to maintain a monopoly on Yogananda's teachings. So that's the context of this. However, now that I say all of that, I'm going to tell you that this letter has absolutely nothing to do with it, because It's a different letter. It's a much, much, much later letter that we're not even going to get to tonight. So my bad. This is very interesting. This is a letter to a person at Ananda whose parents violently opposed her involvement in Ananda and gave her a great deal of difficulty, then repented of their unfortunate behavior and wanted to make peace with the daughter. So, Swami writes, a letter like this one from your mother cannot in charity be ignored. You must respond to her with love. You yourself has, as you've admitted, much anger to work out. Love is the way to expiate that anger. And her letter gives you that opportunity. Be grateful for the chance. Your parents made a mistake and seem to be admitting it. While remaining strong in yourself, you must give them too the opportunity to correct the error at their own pace and according to their own understanding. They brought you into this life and gave you what love they could. For your part, you also chose that family. If they want now to prove themselves good parents to you, you must be to them a good daughter. The important thing only is not to allow them to impose their desires on your own chosen path to fulfillment. But they seem to have recognized that point. Take this single step. Don't expect to run the whole course in one day. Swami signs it in Master's Love. So there's a lot in here about how to get over these difficult life conflicts that come. This particular one, because I remember it when it happened, it was very dramatic and very, very hurtful to the woman to whom this is addressed. And there was naturally an enormous amount of anger. So now her parents are trying to make it up to her. And she's not in a very forgiving mood. And Swami says, you admit it, that you have a lot of anger to work out. So Swami doesn't feel that the mere fact that she has a lot of anger to work out absolves her of the need to assist her parents in their effort at reconciliation. And then Swami says, love is the way to expiate that anger. And this letter gives you that opportunity. The parents have approached her, so it's giving her the opportunity to try to love them instead of being angry at them. Now, Swamiji knows what he's asking of her, which is why way at the bottom he says, take this single step. Just respond graciously to this one letter. Don't expect to run the whole course in a day. I mean, it's quite likely that she wrote him, and then if this happens, then that will happen. If that happens, then this will happen. But Swamiji is always on everybody's side. They've admitted their mistake. What more can you ask of them? For you now to hold yourself aloof when they're trying to make an overture of goodness, then it becomes your pride and your anger that's stopping it. So Swami suggests take a single step. He says, and then they brought you into this life and gave you what love they could. I remember when someone else was talking to Swamiji about their responsibility to their parents. They didn't feel that much of a rapport with the parents, with their own parents. They felt like Ananda was their family, and they didn't feel that much rapport with their biological parents. What is appropriate? Swami's answer was very interesting. The first thing he said is, have they ever tried to take you away from the spiritual path? And the answer to that was no. He said, then you have no grounds for cutting them out of your life. He said, if they ever tried to make you choose between God and them, then you have to choose God. But if they aren't asking that of you, they brought you into this life and they gave you what love they could. They did their best with you. And so we do owe them. Honor thy father and thy mother, which is one of the commandments, sometimes may be taken too far. Swami takes it objectively. But the fundamental point is, if you can, we do owe them a debt. I mean, anybody who's raised a child or knows anybody who's raised a child, you see what an enormous amount of commitment and sacrifice is required to do that. So these sorts of things are like balancing the karma. And so these particular parents tried very hard to break her commitment to Ananda. She refused to allow it to be broken, and she was very angry at them for interfering in her life like that. But now if they say, I'm sorry, and we would like to resurrect a relationship, and she refuses to have one, now she's no longer being forced to choose between God and her parents. And you don't want the karma of stonewalling a sincere effort toward affection. But Swami, I love the way he puts that. They brought you into the world and gave you what love they could. Swami once said, if I expected perfection of all my friends, I would be a very lonely man. And it's also true in our biological family relationships. People can just do what they can do. And of course, you also chose them. And Swami, makes that point right away. I was one of my friends. Her the daughter was born into very difficult circumstances. The family was not intact. It was a really bad moment for conception, but nonetheless, conception happened. So the child's life was, not surprisingly, a little bit disrupted because of the disruption of the family. But then the child, for a long, long time, was very upset with her mother for not giving her the kind of childhood that she would have wanted. Unfortunately, the daughter was not on our path, but my answer to my friend was, listen, I was there. You didn't choose to conceive this child. She inserted herself into the story at a time when no real invitation was offered. Now, of course, my friend adored her daughter and, was a wonderful mother. But we laughed together, but she agreed that her daughter would not hear it. It's like there's this desire to blame, this desire to be the victim. One of the great delusions of life is money. The wine, sensuality, sexuality, and money are often considered to be, if a man is saying it, it's women, wine, and gold is how they put it. Although it's not fair to say women, because men cause as much trouble for women as women cause for men. But nonetheless, that's how it's often put. But money is also, what makes money important is that people think that money will give you power. And I have noticed a lot of times the people in charge of the money assume that a certain power comes with being in charge of the money. But power, when I think of it like that, is one of the major issues that the human being has to sort out in terms of moving from delusion into freedom. And power has many different aspects. I mean, power is power that I exercise, or the power that I lack. So if I lack power, I become the victim. If I exercise power in an unkind way, I become the perpetrator. But they're two sides of the same coin. It's trying to find the place where we can work appropriately. Of course, the delusion is money, but the money is valuable because it leads people to power, freedom, to choose, to influence, like that. So in a situation like this, where you're first a child with the parents, and then the parents become an adult, and then as adult, they try to impose their will upon the young adult child. Wasn't a child anymore at all. That person feels victimized and angry. It just goes on and on and on and on. And we have to realize that, we have all the power that we need from God. And we are all just swimming in the sea of delusion, and everybody's doing their best not to drown. It's not always easy to come to that, especially between children and parents, because there's such a complex of subconscious interwoven. I was very struck once after, there's 3 children in my family, and when both my parents were living, there were various spouses and one child in the family group, and most of the time, the original unit of 5 included somebody else, a spouse or a child. And there was one point in our adult life, must have been very unusual, because when it happened, I remember being in the house that I'd grown up in, or that I'd lived in with my parents, with just the original 5, the 2 of them and the 3 children. We're all adults. And I was so struck, what I can only call by the subconscious soup I felt us living in. And I don't mean it's subconscious necessarily in a bad way. It's just that having been children, with no filter and just the way children are, just coming up through all that, the threads were so interwoven. It was not something you could access with your rational mind. So Swamiji is saying here, you have some anger, you admit it, but love is the way to expiate it. If you really want to get out of that anger, then you behave charitably. You behave in a giving way, even if it's hard. So take a single step. But it's an important, and then Swami says, of course, but the important thing only, and he says this, you must be to them a good daughter if they're trying to be good parents. The important thing only is not to allow them to impose their desires on your own chosen path to fulfillment. And then he adds, but they seem to have recognized this point. But that is the point, because I know sometimes people feel that they owe their parents more than it is fair for their parents to expect. There's a story in Autobiography of a Yogi, which is really powerful. Master was very close with his father. His father was a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya. Later, his father was generous in supporting, his name was Mukunda before he was Yogananda, in his young life. Later on, his father actually supported him in his mission to America. So there was just, and his father was a Kriyaban. He knew that exactly the same path. But one day, Yogananda's father said to him, and actually what he said is sort of interesting. It was a phrase like, yesterday someone told me that your guru accepted a rose from a woman. And there was an implication there that he had behaved improperly. Just by saying that, Master stood up to his father, human birth is something, but divine birth is everything. If you say one more word against my guru, I will disown you as my father forever. Wow. I mean, that's a lot, but it's in the autobiography. Master doesn't tell us there. Swami later said what the comment was. It was just a small comment, but he criticized his guru, and you're not to criticize my guru. Isn't that something? Really? And Swamiji, once in the presence of Yogananda, said, my father, meaning Ray Walters, and Master said, you have no father, God is your father. And then Swami corrected himself, my earthly father. Master said, that's better. And most of the time, our families don't, well, that's not true. I mean, merely to separate ourselves from our families because it's more convenient is one thing. But when they genuinely, especially if they try to take you from your spiritual path, or don't respect it, denigrate it in any way. That's what Master Swami is saying here. You must reach out to them. You must be a good daughter, but you mustn't let them interfere. But since they'd repented of that, he saw no reason for her to remain aloof. I think he also knew she wasn't free. She had karma she had to work out there. Which I have to say, I know because I know the full story she did. So, this is written on June 18th, 1991. All of these dates are irrelevant, but they are there. He says, to define your sense of dignity and self-worth in any terms that affirm your ego is in itself, for a devotee at least, a delusion. Let me put it this way. I'm a composer. Some people think I'm a good one. To the extent that I think I may be good, I might make this a basis for some sense of self-worth. If I did, however, I'd be like any other worldly person. My compositions would be ego accomplishments. No, I am not a composer. I'm a devotee. I've written music as part of my service to God. Now, what's really beautiful here, there's more to this, but it's so sweet, is that Swami doesn't say he didn't write music. Swami doesn't even say he didn't write beautiful music. He might think his music is absolutely wonderful. In fact, a reporter was interviewing him once and asked him the question, what's your favorite music? Without thinking, Swami said, mine, like that. And then he realized how funny that sounded. And then he corrected it. He said, it's not really mine. It was given to me. The music that has passed through me is what he meant, but mine was a simple way to say it. But he said, I'm not saying it's the best music. He said, but you asked me what my favorite music is. And the music that God gave to me and passed through me, he said, matches my soul vibration. And therefore it's my favorite because it matches my vibration so perfectly. Swami himself said, if you want to know me, listen to my music. So it's a very, so what's important about here is it's not like he's being falsely modest. Oh, no, it really is nothing. They're just little ditties, He's not saying anything like that. It's very fine music, and he knows it. Also, because it was given to him by God, he knows it's good music. But I am not the composer. I am not a composer. My self-definition is only that I'm a devotee. And as a devotee, I wrote music. But I'm not a composer. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, when she was picking up some dying person from the street and, taking care of him, she was being filmed, and one of the crew just said, how can you do that? Oh, she said, you see a maggot-covered dying man. I see the face of Jesus. So it's like she wasn't even, and she said in other contexts, she wasn't helping the poor. She was just doing what Jesus asked her to do. And that was her self-definition. I am a person who follows the inner instructions I received from Jesus. Swami says, I'm a devotee, and part of the way I've served my guru is by writing music. He asked me to write music, so I wrote music. That doesn't make me a composer. That just makes me a devotee who writes music. But devotee is the operative word in that. Then he goes on to say, a drama director visited Ananda recently and told me, you are the first playwright I've actually had a chance to talk to. Swami replied, Swami says, I'm not a playwright. I'm just someone who has written one or two plays. Do you see? The more we define ourselves in terms of external accomplishments, the more we limit ourselves. Because a devotee, you see, is an open-ended, up to infinity definition that will last for all as many incarnations as we have left. If I'm a playwright and I have writer's block, then all of a sudden I'm nothing. If I'm a musician, something happens to my hand and I can't play anymore, all of a sudden I'm nothing. But if I'm a devotee, nothing can ever take it away from me. It's the most fundamental and expansive definition we have, because being a devotee, then we can also do all these other things without ever risking our spiritual life, which I just realized as I'm saying that, in the way of Ananda Sangi, which is this completely other course I'm doing at 9 in the morning, and you can find it on my YouTube channel if you look. One of the characteristics of being a devotee through Ananda is to make our life a work of art. He says, whether through music or through the visual arts, or just by a creative expression, is what Swami said. Make our life a creative expression. Let me actually just say it exactly, because I'm not saying right. We aspire to make our own lives works of art, whether through music, through the visual arts, or through the simple deeds of our daily existence, with the view to expressing the bliss that is latent in our deeper selves. And I was talking about that at length as being another way to transcend the ego rather than merely suppressing it. But the key to it, which I didn't express and should have, is that we don't define ourselves by what we do. We define ourselves by who we are. So even this creative expression in our life, or artistic expression, or whatever it is, it's just to share the bliss that we have latent within us, as he put it. It's not to be a composer or to be a painter or to be a perfect chef, although we can and may, even should, strive to be all those things. But we're doing those things as a devotee to express our relationship to God. When a young man who aspired to be a composer, he was a very good musician, really very talented musician, well-trained and a very good musician. And the songs he wrote, some of them were nice, but Swamiji knew he was capable of a lot more, because as he put it to this young man, the songs you're writing are imitative, which is they're not really yet an original expression coming out from you. And he suggested to the man that he put aside for the moment, composing his own music, play and listen to Swamiji's music, because it would make him deeper in himself. Because the vibration of the music that comes through Swami is the vibration of the ray of the divine that we're following, and the music being inherently vibration. That's all music is. It's the Om vibration. And the more we attune to that Om vibration, the more it tunes us into our own self. And then Swami felt when that man became deeper in his own self, then he would have original music, because it would really, he would be coming from a deeper place within himself. But the man wanted the opportunity to express himself, and he said to Swamiji, you know how it is. Sometimes you just feel you have to write a song. You have to express yourself. That's what he said. Sometimes you feel you just have to express yourself. Quite firmly, Swami said, no, I never feel that way. I never want to express myself. He said, what I want to do is I want to serve Master. And if writing music will serve Master, then I'm happy to write music. But if it won't serve Master, he said, I have no compelling need of my own to do it. Of course, that's a very high level of detachment, but it is also what we're working with. And this is Swamiji correcting someone, and I have no idea about the context. So then Swami says, if you rest your sense of self-worth on realities that are intrinsically worthwhile, meaning above all soul qualities and your deepest reality as a child of God, rest your sense of self-worth on those things that are of intrinsic value, which is your soul qualities. Because anything else we do will either lead to ego or lead to crashing disappointment. Because if we, when we were first founding our school here, which was now almost 30 years ago, just to sort of get a feel for what was going on, we went to one of the schools nearby, which was considered to be pretty much the premier private school in the whole area. And, it was a impressive place, very creative, lots of things were good about it. But I remember we were standing outside one of the classrooms. It was about a fourth grade classroom, maybe something like that. And because everybody was beginning to think about adding deeper values to education, it's actually rather funny because we've watched over many years as we put out our description of our school, we've watched other schools sort of take some of those words. But unfortunately, too often we know that they're just taking those words. They don't really understand what we offer. The challenge with our school is to be able to say something that no one else can mimic. Because here we are at this school, and they are teaching the children self-esteem. We know it's important to have self-esteem. So they have this, like on the bulletin board, they have this tree. And each child has made a leaf, and it's called the Self-Esteem Tree. And they put a leaf on the tree to explain why they feel that they have regard for themselves. There were maybe 25 or 30 leaves on that tree, and I read them all. Every one of them, except one, said, I feel good about myself, and then they named an outer accomplishment. I got a perfect on my spelling test. I won the winning goal. I won the prize, and one of them said, I feel good about myself, or however they phrased it, because I'm less moody than I used to be. But every other one was an external accomplishment. So we're training these children to feel that they have worth because of what they've done, which of course means as soon as they cease being the much loved, privileged children of doting parents and get out in the world and start having failures, it won't just be that they've hit a rough spot in life. It'll be that I have no self-worth, and this is not a small thing, oddly and terribly, sometimes people have breakdowns, they become drug addicts, sometimes they even commit suicide. People who seem to have everything because it's all been based on what they can do, and either the pressure of it just gets to them, or they've failed in some external way, and there's nothing underneath it. Real self-worth is knowing who we are intrinsically. as he put it there. One of the students who was graduating from not our branch of Living Wisdom School, but another branch of it, she had to give her little graduation speech, and I mean, the teachers and the principal couldn't have written it better. She wrote it herself, but she said, "What I've learned here is how to work with my own energy, how to direct my energy, and to believe that if I set my mind to it, I can accomplish whatever I set my mind to." Just as simple as that. And that's what we're trying to teach them, that you have it within you. And that's what really matters. Any other thing is inherently you're going to feel nervous, and or you're going to feel not seen or valued only for what you do. And then therefore, when you can't do it anymore, you become worthless. You can see it's a terrible cascading. So this is what Swami's saying here. To define your sense of dignity and self-worth in any terms that affirm your ego, which is outer realities, is in itself for the devotee a delusion. And then he says, what Ananda is about is loving God and serving Him. Our hopes should rest on absorption in Him and on ultimate freedom from our mere humanity. This is so beautiful. Our hopes should rest on our absorption in Him and on ultimate freedom from our mere humanity. Not that we become good at this or good at that. But once our hopes rest with God, see what also happens, it completely frees us, or it will free us, can free us, to be actually really quite good at everything. Because what do we have to lose? You know, if our self-worth is inherent, then we can just reach out without anxiety and try to do all these other things, because we ought to strive to make our lives a work of art. If we have that bliss latent within us, let's just express it. I learned this in a weird way, and I didn't learn it really. It took me decades to learn it, insofar as I have learned it, which is not by any means complete. But I learned to cook once I was ready to learn, and I learned to cook intuitively by a transfer of consciousness from Swamiji. That's the only way I can put it. From over one weekend, I went from not knowing anything about cooking. I knew how to prepare food, but I couldn't make anything taste good. I just didn't know how to do it. And after a weekend, well, I'll just give you the story since I've gotten this far into it. I was in charge of the whole retreat kitchen, and my only concept of food was that it be healthy. I had no relationship to the fact that people wanted food to taste good. I mean, like, duh. But nonetheless, that was the reality. And I was so dedicated to health, and I was, into living off the land, and everything had to be natural, that we had, pounds and pounds of Jerusalem artichokes and lots of kale. This was sort of the fall and the winter. Jerusalem artichokes, with all due respect to Jerusalem artichokes, are exceedingly healthy, but they're very good raw. But any cooked form of Jerusalem artichoke that I have ever tried, including the best Indian cook I know, superb, even she couldn't make them taste good. But I randomly just served them to everybody. And kale was not trendy then. Kale was like super. You had to be so far on the lunatic fringe of health food to eat kale. But we had kale and we had Jerusalem artichokes from the garden. So I just served them every day, sometimes more than once a day. And finally there was just a mutiny, because the people all had to cook what I cooked, because nobody had their own kitchens. They were just entirely dependent on me. And there was a mutiny. By that point, I realized that there was something fundamentally wrong with what I was doing, but I was powerless to shift. I just didn't know how to shift it. Swami's words were, you were so mental, you were so lost in your mind that you actually literally couldn't taste it. And I think he was right. If it was good for you, it tasted good. I didn't have an actual relationship with what it tasted like. It tasted like what I thought it was. So anyway, this Swami, American Swami, who was a friend of Kriyananda's, was coming for the weekend, and he was a portly fellow. He was ample, and he was enthusiastic about his meals. Let's just put it like that. And he was tons of fun. And so Swami Kriyananda was there, and Satya, who was one of the early members of Ananda. I don't know I'm not sure why exactly Satya was there. Maybe Satya already knew the Swami. and Seva, who was my twin, virtually. We were always together. So Seva, Swami, Satya, and this other Swami, he was visiting for the weekend, and he spent all of Friday, Saturday, Sunday with Swami Kriyananda. And Swami himself is a very good cook, and we served all the meals there. I mean, we cooked all our own food. Then we never went to town, or rarely. And so Swami was going to teach me to cook. So I show up with my little notebook like this, my little pen in my ear, and I'm just like all ready. And I start cooking with Swami. And Swami's like, oh, a little of this, a little of that. Oh, that's too much, but we'll just put in some of this and we'll stir it around. Just like, and I'm trying to like write it down, write down what he's saying to me. Completely, absolutely impossible. And then everything that Swami made was really good. So I kind of gave up trying to write it down. And I just became his assistant. I washed vegetables, I washed dishes, I chopped according to his instructions, and I watched him just know how to do it without any support from anywhere. And we sort of went through 3 or 6 or 9 meals like that, whatever it was. And it was the very last, it was Sunday afternoon. And for some reason, we were all lounging around on the floor. I have no idea why we were all on the floor. We were all sitting or reclining on the floor, as I recall it. And we started talking about what we'd have for dinner, and we all decided we'd have a fruit salad because we'd been having pretty heavy meals. And Seva said, let's see, how did it work? Seva said, oh, good, I'll fix it for us. You all don't have to bother. And so Swami at first said, sure, go ahead, make the fruit salad to Seva. But then he stopped her when she was on her way to the kitchen, and this is how he put it. No, he said, I'm teaching Asha to cook. Like that. I mean, with this sort of exaggerated, patronizing air. And so then we went up there, and I cut the vegetables. I peeled the fruit. I peeled the bananas. Just like, how was I learning to cook? The next Monday, when I went back into that retreat kitchen, I just knew how to do it. I could just tell. I could tell what things needed. I just like this cooking intuition was awakened in me, and it was a transfer from Swami to me. Now I say to myself, it took me about, let's see, I've been with Ananda for 45 years. It took me about 33 of them to learn how to write. And I mean, why couldn't he transfer the consciousness of writing into me as quickly as he did the cooking? Well, it was very, very simple. I was raised in a very intellectual household, and we were quite, we ate, of course, but, it just, material things, we just never put a lot of energy into things like that. The value in my house was intellectual, so intellectual things were exceedingly important, but other things were not. If I was joking, in the house that I'm living in right now, the screen is a little bit stiff, and someone said, oh, we need to get that fixed. And I thought, in my whole childhood, if something broke, we'd fix it with duct tape. we just didn't repair things. It's not like we were ridiculous, but we just didn't pay a lot of attention. But intellectual things we paid a tremendous attention to. So cooking meant nothing to me. It was just like I was doing it, and I loved cooking for people. I really enjoyed it, but there was no self-worth involved. To be a good cook simply was no value to me. So I didn't have any egoic resistance. But writing, oh my gosh, my whole sense of self and well-being and fear of failure and fear of success and, blah, 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 it just went on like that. And it took decades before I was able to master all of that because of my egoic involvement in my self-worth. So the point being, when we don't have that, we actually get to be good at what we do because we just jump into it for the fun of it, like children. One of the most important things we teach our children in our school is not to be afraid to fail. Just have fun. It doesn't mean anything when you can't do it well. It just means you get to learn to do it well. But, these competitive educational systems that people set up, as illustrated by that self-esteem tree there in that school, this is how I measure myself. I'm good at this. I'm good at this. I'm good at this. I'm good at that. But the soul knows that this is a lie. So one feels terribly insecure on a certain level. And all love is dependent on my being good enough. You see, it's a nightmare, and this is the world we're living in right now. But Swami's writing to this person. I don't know what the original letter was. But no, no, no. Define yourself with those qualities that are inherent in you, especially your soul qualities. I am a devotee, and as a devotee, I do XYZ. Okay, now Swami's writing, the best method, he puts that in quotes, that I know for unlocking any blockages of energy in the mind is to constantly offer oneself to Master and God. The more open one becomes to divine grace, the easier it becomes simply to lay one's inmost thoughts at His feet. His grace alone can make you whole. This is not, however, a passive process. Don't just wait for God to come and make everything right for you. Think of it as a constant, dynamic self-offering. Nothing in this universe, least of all yourself and your little personality, is really yours. The less you allow yourself to remain attached to your problems, the less they will exist for you at all. And the way to become less involved is by meditation, prayer, and selfless service without any desire for the results of your own actions. There was a woman who came to Ananda at one point, and she was a very magnetic lady, and Swami thought she had a lot of promise, and she did have a lot of promise. But she was accustomed to wrestling with her own, she was self-concerned, and she was a little bit self-preoccupied with overcoming her limitations and processing certain things and always watching her psychological systems like this. And she was part of, the world of Swami Kriyananda, and she was at satsangs and occasionally at smaller gatherings for a month or 2 months. Then she stopped coming. And she said the reason she stopped coming is because when she was with Swamiji, she forgot her problems. And therefore she didn't want to be with him anymore because she needed to remember them so she could work on them. It was like, this is called missing the point. Just missing the point. And so Swami's saying, many difficulties are merely because we're focused on them. One of the earliest aphorisms that I learned on the path of Sanatana Dharma when I was 18 was don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. I just that was I knew there was a truth in there, but I couldn't figure out what it was because all I ever thought about was myself. I don't mean that I was selfish, because I wasn't, but I just was always aware of where I fit in and what I wanted and what I needed. I was self-concerned, which is, all of us are. And I perhaps more than others, but nonetheless. But I realized that if I could happily and creatively put my mind on dynamic service above all, then it never crossed my mind how I was feeling. If I didn't ask myself how I was feeling, I felt fine. And that's not suppression. It was self-forgetfulness, just losing myself in a creative flow. And this is one of the reasons why Swami said, as I was reading earlier, make your life a work of art. Because when we are really tuned into a creative flow, we simply become the energy which flows through us. And if creative, uplifting energy is flowing through us, whether it's a song we're singing or a painting that we're making, or in my case, words that we're writing for a book, it's so uplifting just to be in that flow. There's no question of my problems because there's no me to have them. And it's so hard, and it's very hard for me to grasp, even though I've spent a long time trying to think about it. But let me see where he says it. Nothing in this universe, least of all yourself and your little personality, is really yours. I mean, that's a lot to contemplate, isn't it? Because we're so defined by these personalities. There was a friend of mine who died of cancer, and she died very consciously. She knew there was no hope, and she, went into hospice care and did it in that form. And when she was in like the last few days of her life, a friend came to visit her. It was just, they were just talking about how she was feeling and, so on. And she said, as I lie here, she said, thousands, and she used the word thousands of distinct individual faces keep passing in front of my eyes. And I realized that every single one of them was me in some incarnation or another. Thousands. So, like, who am I? Which one am I? Am I a woman in 2020? Am I a soldier of a William the Conqueror in 1100? Am I a nun with Teresa of Avila back whenever that was? Am I walking with St. Francis? Am I a shopkeeper in Sicily? Was I in a Russian gulag? I mean, like, which one is me? And the answer is none. Each of them is just a costume that we wear for a time for the sole and single purpose of realizing that we are not this. We, to, real, to have the experiences that we need in order to teach us that the only reality is God. That it's just a means to an end. It's a little bit like when you go to the gym, you go to the gym in order to become healthy and strong. You don't go to the gym in order to be able to spend all your time in the gym. It's not like the goal of life is to never leave the gym. You go there because there's a routine you can follow which will enhance what we think of as our life. But in actual fact, this world is a gymnasium. And we come here in order to follow a certain routine, and the mere fact that it lasts 75 or 80 years, it's just a longer routine and it's a little more complex because it goes from being a baby to being an old person, or it's cut off earlier, to follow a certain routine so that we will become strong and we can actually use that strength then to express who we really are, which is those qualities which are inherent to us, which is our true soul nature. And by learning to write music and learning to paint paintings and learning to be good parents and learning to be a good daughter and learning to overcome anger and learning to give people a second chance, that enhances the quality of our inner nature. And so it's the right exercise for us. That's why Swami wrote in that original letter, your parents have repented. They're trying to approach you now. And the lesson you have to learn now is to let go of your anger. Because if you hold on to your anger, then you're just perpetuating the delusion. So this is the gym, this is the machine, and this is the right amount of weight. You have to give it a try. So it's very hard to really consider that. And I've not had these kind of exalted experiences that I've heard about from others. But this woman who had visions of Mother Mary in Medjugorje, she talked about how she's a mother of several children, and she talked about how there's nothing more important to her than her daughters, and she just would give her life in a heartbeat to protect her daughters, and they're always part of her consciousness. But when she has these visions of Mary, she forgets that she has children. She forgets everything about her life. She's completely lost in the joy of her union with Divine Mother. And only when she comes out of those visions does the rest of her life come back to her. And all those who have had, many of those who have had near-death experiences, death in return is more accurate, they have a death in return experience, they just talk about how this whole world just went away. This whole thing that we thought was so important, it just went away. Because they're in the eternal part of themselves. And everything else is just a little bit of a ripple on the surface. And, they bring back these stories of just suddenly realizing what reality actually is and that this is not it. It's just marvelous to contemplate. So he's saying that, we can mess around in our minds, moving the pieces around a lot, or we can just transcend the whole reality. But this is not a passive process, because what happens is that people who have complicated psychological knots that they're afraid to deal with, they don't know how to, or they're more likely they're afraid to deal with. They just get this idea, oh, I can just give it to God. But if you're trying to get a shortcut around the effort required to face and transcend, that's not what the spiritual path is. This is not a passive process. Don't just wait for God to come and make everything right for you. It is a constant, dynamic self-offering. A constant, dynamic self-offering. And then the grace will descend. And he says, and the way to become less involved in this little self is by meditation, prayer, and selfless service without any desire for the results of your actions. Beautiful. Okay. Now somebody has written to Swamiji. This is 1989. The timing matters a little bit. In 1989 and all that time, a lot of new thought energies moving around and people being helpful with different methods of self-transformation and lots of books that were being written. So somebody had asked Swamiji about one of these new thought books. Swami writes, I don't know the book, but infer that you've gained from it the message to love yourself. A good message for you personally. Swami acknowledges that's a good message for you personally. Yet in presenting this message to others, I think you must make it clear to people that is their inner soul essence that they must love, the God within them, and not their egos as such, lest they slip into a kind of spiritual smugness that is a great trap on the path. This is like a very, it's so interesting how words can be used in many different ways. So we're all children of God, and we should, feel ourselves in that way and feel that we're loved by God. So it turns out to be you have to love yourself. But self is a very tricky word because we're lots of things, and not all of them are lovable. So then Swami makes it clear, we must accept ourselves as we are. And meaning by that is that we can't just pretend that we have no faults. We don't make progress by saying, I'm perfect just the way I am, because we may not be at all perfect just the way we are. And it may be self-evident. As Swami said, we're trying to love ourselves, but much of us is not at all lovable. That's how he put it. It's just common sense, because we have many faults that are just not lovable. But we must accept ourselves as we are, but love only that in us which lifts us toward God. Very subtle points. Because if we're at war with ourselves, or if we're hiding from ourselves and won't admit our own limitations, we have to just recognize, I need help. This is who I am. But what we love is not all those qualities that take us away from God. What we love in ourselves is that which is pulling us toward Him. God loves us in spite of our mistakes and delusions, but that doesn't mean He loves our mistakes and delusions. In spite of is different than thinking those mistakes and delusions are charming. They're not. If the teaching to love oneself is not presented in the right context, it can lead to a kind of, I love this phrase, spiritual mushiness. If the instruction to love oneself is not presented in the right context, it can lead to a kind of spiritual mushiness, rather than to that heroic strength and determination without which little progress can be made. And so now we're really at the heart of the matter. And this is something, this is very subtle, and over the many years, I've had to work with this a lot myself, and I've had to work with a lot of people on this. People are often inspired by a love yourself teaching because they have been at war with themselves, or they have a constant negative self-image and a constant inclination to put themselves down, consider themselves unworthy, think of themselves as a bad person, as a failure, all these different things. So it's a revolutionary freedom to say, no, you should just love yourself. And that's why Swami says, it's a good message for you personally. This book where what you've gained from it is the message to love yourself. That's a good message for you personally. Swami says, Swami was always so fair and so exact. But he could see, and perhaps he already knew, because I don't know the context of this letter, that suddenly that person was going to make a campaign about telling everyone that they need to love themselves. And Swami warns that it's very easy to misapply and to misuse that teaching, because we are many different things inside ourselves, and the whole spiritual path is what's in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the battle of Kurukshetra, which is on the field of battle of our consciousness. Well, there's the subconscious, the way we use it in this context. There's the subconscious, which is the collection of everything that we already are. Whatever we've already accomplished, it sits there. There's the superconscious, which is the divine energy of our potential. And the superconscious is always pulling on us. And the subconscious is always pulling on us. And the conscious mind is the field of battle. It's the field of Kurukshetra, where the battle of the Mahabharata, from which the Gita is taken, that's where it happens. And so we don't just drift our way into superconsciousness, because we have this huge subconscious force field that's always telling us, you don't need to change, just stay the way you are. Everything is fine just the way it is. Stay with what's comfortable to you. This is what you know. This is who you've always been. This is who you'll always be. The subconscious doesn't have to be negative. The subconscious can be programmed to be helpful, but it also tries to keep us where we are. So if we just say, I love myself, we don't really want to love all those limiting qualities, because we don't love them. They're not really our friends. They're the enemy of our self-realization. But then we get into a conflict where we start hating ourselves and we're at war with ourselves and we don't want to admit it and we feel so terrible if we see it. This is where Swami said we have to accept it. This is the karma that I have at this moment. This is my starting point. My starting point is I'm angry. My starting point is that I'm deeply disappointed. My starting point is that I lack courage. My starting point is I'm terribly restless. You have to accept that's what it is. But what we want to love is our divine potential. And recognize these are intruders, that it doesn't serve us to hate either. This is just what I have to deal with. So the idea has to be presented carefully, because, how does he say it? At first, you might slip into a kind of spiritual smugness that is a trap on the path. Well, I just love myself just the way I am. You know, God made me this way, and this is just the way I am. And there's really very little aspiration in that. It just allows you to feel like you've already accomplished something. Like there was this very, very popular spiritual teacher through the 70s, maybe even into the 80s. And one of my friends, Anandi, just characterized why his teaching was so popular. His teaching was, just do whatever you feel like doing, but call it spiritual. And so they lived a very licentious, tremendously hedonistic, incredibly chaotic life, the whole entourage. But they called it spiritual because I love myself and God loves me just the way I am. So you get this complete confusion about what the spiritual path really is. But the antithesis of that is that we're always at war with ourselves and we hate ourselves and we're always putting ourselves down. That's not a good idea either. But we are what we are. And this is where we stand, and this is the battle that we have to fight. And if we don't clearly delineate that, then it can lead to a kind of spiritual mushiness where you really are not quite sure what you're supposed to do. So this also relates to what he said earlier. I mean, these letters are all independent, but they end up relating to each other. When he says, nothing in this universe, least of all yourself or your little personality, is actually you. So that's how you can accept it. This is the clothes I'm wearing right now. You know, the suit I'm wearing right now has a lot of anger and a little bit of bitterness, and there's some resentment over here, and there's a lot of jealousy up the right side. You know, this is what I have to work with. These are the soldiers that are going to come out on the field of battle when I try to aspire for higher things. These are the soldiers that are going to come out of my subconscious and try to lure me back into their reality. So if you don't know, if you're not able to calmly accept that this is my inclination, you get into mushiness because you just don't know what's really happening and you can't make wise decisions. So yes, it's a good message for you personally, but when you start presenting it, be careful, because we don't want to become smug and we don't want to become mushy. Swami called the publication company, Ananda's publication company, changed the name at one point to Crystal Clarity. Just crystal clarity. It's enormously helpful on the spiritual path to not be mushy, but to bring everything that you can bring to as clear and vivid a focus as possible. That's not intellectual, That's just self-honesty. You don't have to have a lot of words to spin that, but just, this is who I am. I remember how much I used to try to present myself as other than I was. As Swami said, you want so much to be a good disciple that, you're just trying to put that front on rather than actually accepting what you really feel and working with what you really feel. You're always trying to lay a different set of values, a different kind of behavior on top of the ones I don't want to accept. And he said, you never fooled me. And it just creates chaos. But you just accept, this is who I am. And from that, you can build the tension. I remember Swamiji gave advice to a woman, there might even be a letter in here. And she was very, very worried about herself all the time. She was always terrified that she would fail in this way or fail in that way, or she was a bad person in this way or the bad in another. And Swami took a chance, but it was a calculated risk. And he said to her, we've been, I've talked to you about this many, many times. We haven't seemed to make much progress. He said, let's try it from a different angle. Just for the sake of discussion, let's assume that everything you fear about yourself is true. And let's just assume it all. He said, you're spending all this energy trying to hold these fears at bay. He said, let's just accept that they're true. You know that you're not very good at this, and you're not very good at that, and you're not very good at this, and you're not very good at that. And then let's just build from there. And just take all the tension away from warring against yourself. I've seen people who, in the name of discipline and so on, they just go to war with yourself, and I've never seen it work. But nor have I seen it work to just declare that I'm perfect and I love myself the way I am, because it's usually not sincere, because they don't love themselves the way they are. They'd like to lose 15 pounds and they'd like to be nicer to people around them and, and be just whatever it is. It's not honest. But to accept it and then work from that is something else. So this letter is about love itself. Swami writes, if you feel unhappy and lifeless, it's because you need to give more of yourself. You want love, of course, everyone does. But love is obtained by learning first to give love. Love God in people and be open and giving to all. In this way, you will develop the magnetism to attract the right partner. This was obviously someone who's writing about loneliness and the desire to have a mate. Music could be one way of doing it, but whatever you do should be entered into with the thought of giving, not of getting. I think it is time you committed yourself more deeply to God and to the spiritual search in the giving, not a getting way. There's just really so much in that. Over the course of many years of having to do a lot of personal counseling with people, for people, I don't know what the right word is. I said with because I didn't want to say for, but they would come to me for advice. I just wanted to make that clear. My way of advising people most of the time was to listen closely and then repeat back more clearly what they just said to me, because almost everyone already knows. It's just they can't quite sort it out. So I would listen to what people would tell me and then try to present it back to them in a way that sorted through the confusion. So in this day and age, this particular time in history, personal relationships, romantic partnerships are basically the poison of choice for the age, I think, or the torture of choice imposed to us by a loving divine mother, but imposed on us. But nonetheless, this is where we are. Relationships are tricky. And society itself, very little in our society really supports a mature understanding of human romantic love. It's just the world we live in now. Way, way over-sexualized, way over-romanticized, way too selfish, just way too selfish. So it's a long, hard fight. Swami actually made a comment that it'll be several generations before it ever straightens out, because we're going to have to raise a couple of generations of children with a deeper understanding of sexuality, of human love, of our relationship to God before the whole society will stabilize again. So anyway, so I've had a lot of people over the years come and, they're lonely and they feel that they could be somebody's loving partner. But the difficulty with that is it's not something you can force. It's not like you could go out and buy a set of paints and learn to paint, or rent a piano and learn to play the piano. There's a lot of things that are within our power to concentrate on and make happen with our own energy. Yes, you can pray for a mate and you can do all sorts of things that might help magnetize it. Master has a prayer to draw a soul companion to you. It's not that there's nothing you can do, but it's a good bit out of our hands. Whereas many other things that we desire are much more within our individual grasp to create. This is entirely dependent on someone else. And even once that relationship begins, you're still two independent jivas, and nobody can dictate to another what should happen. But oftentimes when people come to me, and this is a little bit of what Swami's saying here, they have this deep desire for a partner, and their lives are kind of, a little, you feel unhappy and lifeless, because, and so they're a little unhappy and lifeless. They're just a little stuck. So I've often asked people, and I, not in the session, but, I would like you to make a list. I'd like you to make a list of everything you think is going to be yours once you have a partner, and everything that you think you'll be able to do once you have a partner. Just everything. Why do you want this relationship? Let's write it all down. Now look at that list and see how many of those things are actually dependent on having a partner, and how many of them are within your personal solitary capacity to create. I would like to have an attractive home. I would like to plant a garden. I would like to take interesting trips. I would like to have somebody to sing with. I would like to have more children in my life. I want to get a dog. I mean, just there's lots of lists. I would like to host people in my home. There's lots of things you can say that you picture this partnership and all these things are going to happen. I said, so look at, and after that's done, pick every one of those things that you can do on your own before your partner comes. And then begin to do them. Because unless you are on that wavelength, you are never going to attract anybody who's on that wavelength. If you remain lifeless and unhappy, the radio signal you're sending out to the universe is, I am lifeless and unhappy. And it's not going out very strongly anyway, but if it does go out, the only person who's going to hear it is someone who's also lifeless and unhappy. And that's not what you're looking for. And what Swami says so simply is, if you want love, you have to give it. That's what, and you might say, well, I want someone to love. Well, gosh, you think there's only one person and you haven't yet met them, and you have no opportunities to love until that one person finally comes, and then all of a sudden you're going to discover you have this big, expansive heart? I mean, what else could you love? A kitten? The children who live next door to you, your grandmother? Like, what else could you love? What is it that we're really looking for? So Swami's saying here again, love God and people and be open and giving to all. In this way, you will develop the magnetism to attract the right partner, because that's what you really want. You want the magnetism to attract the right partner. You don't want to just have somebody. I mean, that just ends up being far more miserable. And then he says music could be one way of doing it, but whatever you do should be entered into with the thought of giving, not getting. And then he says, I think it's time for you to become a deeper kind of devotee. And to commit yourself more deeply to God and to the spiritual search in a giving, not a getting way. So this person is complaining about lack in their life, and several times through this, Swami keeps saying, but you're always trying to get for yourself. That's not the kind of magnetism that creates prosperity. What creates prosperity, whatever the field you're thinking of, whether it's money or love relationships or art or whatever it is, it comes from being in the flow. You open the you open the portals, let everything flow through, and then you become the kind of person that you want your partner to be. And then that kind of partner will notice you. Otherwise, they'll never notice you. You'll just get someone as lifeless and as unhappy as yourself, which is really not a very good plan. And also, who knows what your destiny is? We like to think that there's somebody out there for everyone, but in these days, you can't count on it. So we also have to think, what if? I've observed what I used to call, a lot of times I feel like people are camping in their own life. They haven't really committed themselves to their life. They're just camping, waiting for somebody to show up, and then they're going to commit themselves. But the problem is that becomes a habit of uncommitment, of not being committed. And also it becomes your signal. So you don't attract somebody who's solid. You attract somebody who's camping too, and then two of you are camping, and then you really are adrift. Sink roots. Imagine that this might be my life forever. Then what would I do? I remember at a certain point, Swami Kriyananda sent me to this community in Palo Alto at the beginning of January 1987. You can see that's a long time ago, 33 years now. And we were starting up this urban community here, which is now well established. And I always thought that I would start more than one community. I was a founding member of the village and a founding member here, but I thought that this would be a stopping off point. Then there'd be another and maybe another. I have entrepreneurial energy, and it seemed like a possibility. But gradually over time, that wasn't happening. And at a certain point, Swamiji was going to move us out of here and replace us with someone else and move us to the East Coast. But the replacement proved not to be a good idea, and the whole thing just proved not to be a good idea. And at that point, Swami turned to me and he said, I think you should think about just being here for the rest of your life, essentially. Did he say that, or did I ask him? But somehow or another, it came out. Just don't think that you're moving on from here. And that was really interesting for me, because I realized how many aspects of my life in this community, ranging from certain people that I just didn't know how to get along with, certain tasks that I just kept procrastinating, a corner of the garden where I just couldn't make anything grow, just so many things I was waiting to be rescued from. And I was really surprised when the possibility that I was never going to be rescued from the specific things in this context that I didn't want to face. I was surprised how many things there were that I was waiting to be rescued from. I didn't know that. I just maneuvered through life knowing that not everything had to be settled, because I was going to get to leave. And it was a huge change when I had to just say to myself, they're going to cremate your ashes and bury them under the garden, in the garden here. This is it. And I don't know, a lot of years have passed since then, but it totally changed the way I related to my life. Because that idea of waiting to be rescued, that's a really interesting one. I'm not really going to commit. I'm not really going to try, because someone is going to rescue me. It's really worth contemplating. What are you hoping to be rescued from? And that's actually, now that I think about it, I often talk about Stephen Devine, who was one of the pioneers of end of life care, hospice care, end of life, just approaching death in a very different way. He was a contemporary of mine, so in the 60s and the 70s, he was a very important figure. And he wrote a wonderful book. And I mean, my memories of these things are decades out of date. This is probably so vintage by now. There's a wonderful book. It was called Who Dies? He was a devotee, probably of Neem Karoli Baba, but I'm not certain. But in his retreats that he would hold for people who had terminal diagnoses, he would have them make 2 lists. And the first list would be everything that they were going to miss out on because their life was going to end sooner than they had hoped. it was everybody would weep and think about what they were going to miss. I'll never hold my grandchild. I'll never, dance with my wife at my daughter's wedding. I won't live long enough to see my son bar mitzvah, whatever it might be. Just loss after loss after loss. Over here, write down all the things that you're going to not have to face because you're going to die, that you're going to get out of, that you just won't have to deal with. I'll never have to make peace with my father, who I hate like this. I won't have to worry about finding a profession that I like. I won't have to stop being jealous of so-and-so, whatever it might be. All the things that I get to run away from. And that turns out to be, in his way of dealing with people, that's the most important one. What are we trying to be rescued from? And then sometimes that desire to be rescued is so intense, seemingly from reading what he was saying, that we actually create an exit for ourselves, the mind-body connection. And of course, not always, but sometimes when we give up the desire to be rescued, we can also give up the disease because it's not serving us anymore. It's very, very interesting. I've never worked with dying people in that sense, and I've never taken it so far in myself as to manifest physical symptoms. So I'm way beyond my portfolio, and I'm talking about it from that angle. But I definitely know what it feels like to have a long list of mostly unfaced things that I'm hoping never to have to face because I'm going to be rescued. So it's really worth like this. And I was very pleased with myself at some point later, much later, when, let's see in the same thing, the same exercise, the things that I get to avoid. I think that was how the wording was. And I realized I really couldn't put anything on that list because the belief in reincarnation is so great that there's no way to postponed, perhaps, but not avoided and not really rescued from, because I'll have to do it now or I'll have to do it later. And if it's later, it'll be now, and it'll be no different than the way it feels now. So what's the point? I mean, I can accept the fact that I'm not big enough to transcend it. I have a list of those that I would really like to overcome, but I'm just not big enough to transcend them. But I know that I will have to, because I will have to. What choice do I have? I remember once I was absolutely livid with God, really, really livid, and all the gurus, every one of them, I was really annoyed because they'd given me a very tough assignment and I was going to have to fulfill it. That was just simply it, because I knew I had to fulfill it, and I really, really, really didn't want to. We're very funny, aren't we? It's not funny when it's happening. It's not at all funny when it's happening. There's nothing even slightly humorous about it when it's happening. But after it's over, it looks a little different. That's, I'm sitting here with Keshava Betts, who's the cameraman here. And I'm mentioning that because I remember this story, and it was his mother, actually. And it was his parents, who I knew before Keshava was on the scene. And I can't remember the context. I wish I could remember what the story was, but something really ghastly happened. And there was a lot of us staying in the house together. And the first time she told the story, it was just so painful. It was just such a painful story. The second time she told the story, it was neutral. The third time she told the story, it was dynamic and interesting. And the fourth time she told the story, we were all laughing. And it happened over the course of an hour or an hour and a half. But it was just like, it wasn't funny when it was happening. But the more distance we got from it, the more we got to tell it, the funnier it became. Swami's question like that is, why waste all that time? We're going to be free eventually. Why waste all that time? God bless you, friends.